The gavel's echo reverberated through the courtroom, louder than the deafening silence that followed. Jacob's hands gripped the edge of the desk as he tried to hold himself together, but his mind was already unraveling. Guilty, the judge declared, and with those two words, the world he knew came crashing down. Jacob had fought for years to build his reputation, but now it seemed that it was all for nothing. He glanced at Sarah, her face pale with shock, but her eyes spoke volumes: disappointment, fear, confusion. He wanted to say something, anything to make it right, but no words came. The room felt like it was closing in on him. He could hear the whispers, the clicks of cameras, the murmurs of the people who once admired him now turning away. Everything he worked for, everything he stood for, was gone in an instant. How did it come to this? He thought, struggling to breathe. But the answer was as elusive as the truth itself. Jacob stood outside the courthouse, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. The street lights flickered, casting shadows on the cracked pavement beneath his feet. "I don't know how to fix this, Sarah," he said, his voice cracking under the pressure. Sarah, standing just a few feet away, didn't respond right away. Her face was pale, her eyes distant, as if she were already mourning the future they would no longer have. "We can't fix it," she finally said, her voice low and steady. "You've lost everything, I've lost everything, and I don't know how much more of this I can take." Jacob's heart sank, and for the first time since the verdict, he felt truly alone. He had fought so hard for success, but now, in the blink of an eye, it had all fallen apart. "I know," he whispered back, staring at the ground. "I don't know who I am anymore." Days passed, and Jacob found himself drowning in the aftermath of the trial. The apartment felt foreign, like a shell of the life he used to know. The phone rang endlessly, but Jacob didn't have the strength to answer. He couldn't face his lawyer, his family, or anyone. Every time he closed his eyes, the words guilty replayed in his mind. He couldn't escape it. He hadn't just lost the case. He'd lost himself. His mind wandered back to the night of the trial, to the betrayal, the lies. He had trusted people who never had his best interests at heart. "How did I let this happen?" Jacob asked himself, but there were no answers. Only more silence. Jacob met with his lawyer, Richard, in a small, windowless office. Richard's face was hard, his posture stiff as he spoke. "We need to act fast, Jacob," Richard said, his voice stern. "The media is already picking up on the case, and it's only a matter of time before public opinion turns against you. If we don't find something soon, this will be the end of everything." Jacob looked at him, the weight of his words hitting him like a punch to the gut. "I can't lose everything," Jacob whispered, his voice desperate. "You won't," Richard replied, his gaze softening, "but only if we make the right moves now." Jacob stepped out of the office, the weight of the world pressing on his chest. He looked up at the bustling city around him, but it felt like he was walking in a dream. The noise, the people, it all seemed so distant. "What now?" he whispered to himself. He couldn't answer. His world had been shattered, and yet life continued. He had to fight for the truth, but the truth felt more elusive with each passing day. He didn't know what was left to fight for, but he knew he couldn't stop now. "I have to do this," he muttered, the uncertainty in his voice giving way to the faintest flicker of resolve. Jacob sat in his apartment, papers and files scattered across the table. The case had become an obsession. Every detail, every shred of evidence felt like a puzzle piece, but something was missing. As he sifted through the files, his mind raced. "There's got to be something," he muttered, his voice low. Then, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. "We need to talk. It's urgent." The words felt like a punch. Jacob knew their relationship had taken a hit during the trial, but now he wasn't sure if he was ready to hear what she had to say. His heart pounded as he hit call. "Sarah," he answered, his voice betraying his anxiety. "Jacob," she replied, her tone tense. "I found something. I need you to meet me." Jacob met Sarah at a small coffee shop, its windows fogged up from the cold. The air between them was thick with unsaid words. Sarah sat across from him, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of coffee. Her eyes avoided his, darting nervously to the window. "What is it, Sarah?" Jacob asked, his impatience seeping through. She hesitated before speaking. "I found something that links the case to people we know, people you've trusted." "Jacob, I don't know if you're ready to hear this." Jacob leaned in, his breath shallow. "Just tell me," he urged, his voice low, desperate for answers. "Your father, Jacob," she said, the words hitting him like a thunderclap. "He's involved." The revelation about his father hit Jacob like a wave, leaving him gasping for air. "No, it can't be," he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. "My father? Involved in this?" Sarah nodded, her expression somber. "I didn't want to believe it either, but the evidence is there. I think you need to confront him." Jacob's mind whirled. The man who had been his hero, his pillar of support, was now a suspect in a case that was tearing his life apart. He stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need answers," Jacob said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I'm going to see him." Jacob stood outside his father's house, staring at the familiar door that had once felt like a safe haven. Now, it felt like a prison. He knocked, his fist shaking slightly. The door opened slowly, and there stood his father Richard, looking older than Jacob remembered. His father's face was a mask of surprise, then quickly masked by a practiced smile. "Jacob," Richard said, his voice warm but distant. "What brings you here?" Jacob took a deep breath, his words coming out in a rush. "I know about the case. I know you're involved." Richard's face tightened, his eyes flickering briefly before he spoke. "You've got it all wrong. Come inside. We need to talk." Inside, Jacob sat across from his father, the weight of the conversation hanging between them, like a fog. "Why, Dad?" Jacob asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Richard's expression softened for a moment, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I never wanted you involved in this, Jacob," he said quietly. "It was a mistake, one I thought I could fix before it got out of hand. But it's too late now." Jacob's eyes burned with fury and hurt. "You're not the man I thought you were," he spat, his voice rising. Richard's face hardened, and he stood up. "You think you're the only one who's had to make hard choices?" His voice was cold now. "You'll never understand the things I've done to protect you." Jacob stood too, shaking with anger. "I don't want your protection," he said, his voice filled with venom. "I want the truth." Jacob sat in his car, parked outside his father's house. The conversation inside had left him shaken, but there was no time for doubt now. He knew his next move. He needed answers, and they wouldn't come from his father. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "I've got more information. You're not going to believe this." He stared at the message, a sense of urgency gripping him. He replied quickly, "Where are you?" Moments later, his phone rang. "Jacob, meet me at the office. It's time we dug deeper." Jacob's heart raced, a mixture of anticipation and dread filling him. He started the engine and drove off, his mind already preparing for what he might learn. At Sarah's office, the air was thick with tension. She had her laptop open, a series of documents spread out across her desk. "This isn't just about your father," Sarah said, her voice low, almost too calm. "The conspiracy runs deeper than we thought. We're talking about people in the highest places, Jacob." Jacob leaned forward, his eyes locked on the screen. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight. "I mean your father is just a pawn in a much larger game. The real players are people with power and influence. They're trying to cover their tracks." Sarah clicked on a file, pulling up a list of names. "And this list, these are the people who helped orchestrate the cover-up." Jacob's heart skipped a beat as one name flashed on the screen. John Walker, the district attorney who had always been a mentor to him. "Walker?" Jacob's voice cracked. "I trusted him." Jacob's mind raced as he processed the information. John Walker, his mentor, the man who had guided him through his early career, was now tied to a web of lies and betrayal. How could he be involved? Jacob murmured, more to himself than to Sarah. She leaned back in her chair, her face grim. "People are capable of doing unspeakable things when they have something to protect," Walker is protecting his career. And maybe his freedom. Jacob clenched his fists, the betrayal running deeper than he ever could have imagined. I need to confront him, he said, determination hardening his voice. But I can't do this alone. Sarah met his gaze, nodding. I'm with you, Jacob. We'll get to the bottom of this no matter what. Jacob and Sarah drove to John Walker's office, the night air pressing against the car windows. Jacob was silent, his thoughts consumed by the confrontation ahead. As they pulled into the parking lot, Sarah turned to him. Are you sure about this? She asked softly. Jacob didn't answer right away. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. I have to know the truth, no matter the cost, he said, his voice low and filled with a quiet rage. They stepped out of the car and walked towards the building. The lobby was eerily empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Jacob could feel the weight of every step as they made their way to the elevator. When the doors opened to the top floor, they stepped out into the heart of the storm. Walker's office was just down the hall. It was now or never. John Walker stood at his office window, looking out at the city below. His back was to them as Jacob and Sarah entered. The moment Walker turned around, Jacob felt the weight of everything they had uncovered come crashing down. Jacob, Sarah, Walker said, his voice cool and measured. What brings you here? Jacob's voice was cold. I know what you've been hiding, Walker. I know about the cover-up, and I know your name is on that list. Walker's face remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something, guilt, fear. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Walker said, his tone sharp. You think you've uncovered some grand conspiracy, but you don't know the first thing about what's really at stake. Jacob stepped forward, his anger barely contained. Then tell me. Explain why you sold me out, he demanded. The silence between them was thick, the tension palpable. Jacob stared at Walker, the anger surging through him like a wildfire. You knew. You always knew, Jacob said, his voice shaking. And yet you kept me in the dark. All those years of loyalty, wasted. Walker's expression hardened, his calm demeanor never wavering. Loyalty is a luxury in this world, he replied coolly. It's not about right or wrong, Jacob. It's about survival. Jacob clenched his fists, feeling the weight of betrayal crashing down on him. Survival? He echoed bitterly. You sold your soul for a seat at the table. You could have helped me. Helped us all. Instead, you've been playing me like a pawn. Walker's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a cold whisper. You think you're any different? You think you wouldn't have done the same thing if you were in my shoes? Jacob's breath hitched, the reality of the situation sinking in. The man who had been a father figure to him now stood before him, nothing more than a cold, calculating stranger. I'm nothing like you, Jay. The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah, who had been standing off to the side, stepped forward, her voice breaking the tension. Jacob, this isn't going to get us anywhere, she said gently. We need to think clearly. Jacob shot her a quick glance, his emotions bubbling just beneath the surface. I'm done thinking, Sarah. This man, this monster, has ruined everything, and now he's trying to justify it. Walker's lips curled into a slight smirk. You're wasting your time, Jacob. You have no idea who you're up against. You think you can take me down with a few words and some misplaced ideals? Sarah's gaze flicked between them, her concern deepening. We don't have to fight like this. We're better than this. But Jacob was beyond reasoning. He stepped closer to Walker, his eyes filled with a mix of fury and pain. I trusted you, Jacob said, his voice quieter now but still laced with emotion. And now I have to take everything down, starting with you. Walker's expression shifted slightly, a hint of annoyance creeping into his voice. You really think you can expose me, Jacob? I've been in this game longer than you've been alive. The truth doesn't matter when you're holding all the cards. Jacob's resolve only hardened. You're wrong, he said, his voice steady now. The truth is the one thing they can't take from us, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it. Walker scoffed, turning away to stare out the window, his back to Jacob. You'll never make it, Jacob. You'll get eaten alive by this world. Sarah's voice was soft, almost a whisper, as she addressed Jacob. "Don't let him get in your head. We're in this together. You're not alone." Jacob turned to her, the fire still burning in his chest but tempered by the reassurance in her words. "I'm not alone," he said. "And I'm not backing down." Jacob and Sarah walked out of Walker's office, the weight of their conversation hanging heavily in the air. Outside, the city buzzed with life, oblivious to the storm that was brewing. Jacob couldn't shake the anger that still burned inside him, the feeling of betrayal that seemed to consume him from the inside out. "We have to move fast," Jacob said, his voice low but urgent. "We have to expose this. Expose him, before he has a chance to cover his tracks." Sarah nodded. "We're not alone in this. We've got the right people behind us. The truth will come out." Jacob glanced at her, the resolve in his eyes unwavering. "We're going to make it right. I'm not going to let him destroy everything I've worked for." Sarah's hand gently brushed his arm as they walked down the street. "Together, Jacob. We'll bring him down together." Later that night, Jacob sat alone in his apartment, staring at the wall, his thoughts racing. He had always known that power, wealth, and influence could corrupt, but now he was seeing it firsthand. He glanced at the file Sarah had given him earlier, the evidence that could bring Walker down. His fingers hovered over the stack of documents, the weight of the truth feeling like a burden he wasn't sure he could bear. "This is it," he whispered to himself, more as a reminder than a question. "This is how we take him down." But as he reached for the papers, his phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. "You're getting too close, Jacob. Back off now or things will get worse." Jacob's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't flinch. He had come too far to back down now. "I'm not afraid," he muttered under his breath, picking up the papers and beginning to make his next move. Jacob stood in front of his computer, the dim glow illuminating his determined face. "This is it," he muttered, scanning through the files Sarah had sent. He could feel the walls closing in, the pressure mounting as the truth began to surface. "Walker thought he could play me," Jacob said to himself, clicking through page after page of incriminating evidence. "But it's my turn now." His phone buzzed again. A call. He hesitated before answering. "Jacob," the voice on the other end said, calm but urgent. "It's time. We've got everything we need. Walker doesn't know we're onto him." Jacob's eyes hardened. "Then let's finish this. He's not walking away from this. Not anymore." The next morning, Jacob and Sarah met in a small cafe, their usual meeting place, but today it felt different. There was a sense of finality in the air. "We're almost there," Sarah said, her voice steady but with an edge of nervousness. Jacob nodded, his fingers tapping restlessly on the table. "I don't think Walker realizes how much he's underestimated us," he said, glancing around the cafe, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "He's too comfortable in his power, Sarah, and that's his mistake." Sarah leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Just be careful. This is bigger than both of us. Walker has people everywhere." Jacob's gaze never wavered. "Then we'll have to be smarter. It's time to bring everything into the open." The day had come. Jacob walked into the courthouse, his heart pounding in his chest. The file he carried weighed heavily, a tangible representation of everything he had fought for. As he walked through the doors, he could feel the eyes of the room on him. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had ever been wronged by those in power. He took a deep breath, adjusting his tie, and walked to the front. "This is it," he whispered. "No turning back now." The judge entered, and the proceedings began, the fate of everything Jacob had worked for hanging in the balance. As the trial progressed, Jacob's case began to unfold. Every piece of evidence he presented seemed to chip away at Walker's carefully crafted facade. The defense tried to counter, but Jacob's calm demeanor and the undeniable proof spoke for themselves. Sarah sat beside him, her eyes glued to the proceedings. Walker's calm facade was beginning to crack, his eyes flickering with unease. Jacob stood tall as the final piece of evidence was presented, a recording of a conversation between Walker and one of his associates, discussing the very crimes they were being accused of. "You're finished," Jacob whispered under his breath, knowing this was the moment that would change everything. As the judge deliberated, the room fell into an eerie silence. Jacob sat in the corner of the courtroom, his mind racing, replaying every moment that led him to this point. His phone buzzed once more, this time a message from an anonymous number. "You've won. But Walker won't go down without a fight." Jacob's heart sank. He had exposed the truth, but the danger wasn't over yet. The final gavel sounded, and the judge's voice echoed through the room. "Guilty." "Bill?" The word hit Jacob like a punch to the gut. Walker's expression was a mix of shock and fury, but Jacob didn't feel victorious. The battle was far from over. "This isn't the end," Jacob whispered to himself. "It's only just begun." Jacob walked out of the courthouse, the weight of the verdict still settling in his chest. The day was over, but he knew the real battle had just begun. The media frenzy had already started. Reporters rushed to ask him questions, their microphones thrusting forward like sharp knives. "What's next for you, Mr. Harris?" one of them asked, her voice sharp. Jacob hesitated, glancing at Sarah, who stood beside him, her expression a mirror of his own exhaustion. "We fight to make sure this doesn't happen again," Jacob said, his voice steady. "Justice isn't just about today, it's about the future." The reporters pressed, but Jacob didn't look back as he made his way to the car. The world could wait. He had a war to finish. Later that night, Jacob and Sarah met at his apartment, away from the chaos. "They're not going to let this go," Jacob said, pacing back and forth. "Walker's already working on his appeal. He'll fight this with everything he's got." Sarah nodded. "I know. But you're not alone in this, Jacob. We have the truth. And that's more than Walker can ever take from us." Jacob stopped pacing, turning to her. "I don't know if that's enough. I've seen people with more power than him win. They have everything. Money, influence, connections. And yet we're the ones fighting for what's right." He sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. "I just don't know if I can keep doing this. Every time I think I'm done, they pull me back in." The phone rang late into the night, breaking the tense silence in the room. Jacob glanced at Sarah before picking it up. "Jacob," the voice on the other end was familiar but cold. "You need to stop. Walker's not done with you. He's not going to let this end. Not unless you back off." Jacob's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" he demanded. The voice was a low chuckle. "I think you know. Just understand that the stakes are higher than you realize. You've stirred up a hornet's nest, and there's no way out now." The line went dead before Jacob could respond. He set the phone down slowly, his pulse quickening. "This just got personal," he said, looking at Sarah. "We need to prepare. Walker's going to fight dirty." Jacob's paranoia grew with each passing day. His every move felt like it was being watched, his every phone call intercepted. He couldn't escape the feeling that something was closing in on him. The emails and text messages from Walker's associates kept coming, cryptic threats and veiled warnings that left him on edge. It was more than just about winning the case now. It was about survival. "What did I get myself into?" Jacob muttered, staring out the window into the city below. The once bright lights now felt oppressive, like they were all part of a system he couldn't escape. "We need to end this, Sarah," he said, turning to face her. "It's not just about the case anymore. It's about stopping him, before he stops us." The next day, Jacob met with his lawyer to discuss the growing threats and what steps they should take next. "We're at a crossroads," the lawyer said. "If Walker goes public with his appeal, everything you've worked for could unravel. We need a countermeasure." Jacob nodded, his jaw set. "We need to hit them first. I'm not waiting for Walker to make the next move. We take him down before he has a chance to come after me again." Sarah's voice broke through the conversation. "Jacob, be careful. We don't know what he's capable of. We need to be smart about this." Jacob turned to her, his expression hardening. "I'm done being careful. It's time to end this once and for all." Jacob sat in his office, the weight of the final decision pressing down on him. The evidence was stacked in his favor, but so was the risk of everything unraveling. His phone buzzed, an encrypted message from his lawyer. "The moment has arrived. Walker is cornered, but he's making his final move. Jacob leaned back in his chair, the familiar tension creeping up his spine. "There's no turning back," he whispered to himself. Sarah's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of the stakes. His reputation, his career, and his future were all on the line. He opened the message, reading the words carefully. "It's now or never. Take the risk or Walker will bury you." His fingers hovered over the keyboard. "This is it," Jacob said. One last play. The courtroom was packed, and the air was thick with anticipation. The case had become a media spectacle, and today would be the final act. Jacob stood at the defendant's table, facing Walker across the room. Walker, looking as calm and composed as ever, met his gaze with a cold smirk. "You think you've won, don't you?" Walker said, his voice smooth but laced with venom. Jacob didn't flinch. "I'm not here to win, Walker. I'm here to make sure you never hurt anyone again." The judge called for order, and the tension in the room became unbearable. The battle was no longer just about the case. It was about something far deeper. Jacob was fighting for his future, his honor, and his peace of mind. As the trial continued, Jacob could feel the weight of his past decisions closing in on him. The accusations, the mistakes, the lives that had been shattered because of his involvement in the case. Everything seemed to collapse in on him. Walker's lawyer presented their final arguments, casting doubt on every piece of evidence Jacob had worked so hard to gather. The words stung, but Jacob fought back the growing fear. He had to trust in the truth. His voice shook as he stood to present his closing statement. "The truth is not always easy to face," Jacob said, his eyes locking with the jury. "But it's the only thing that will set us free. This man has spent his life hiding behind lies, using others as pawns. But we are not his pawns anymore. I ask you to see the truth, to stand for justice." The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Jacob sat in the holding room, his hands trembling. His thoughts were a whirlwind. Had he done enough? Was the evidence strong enough? The weight of the world seemed to rest on the verdict. Finally, the door opened, and the bailiff entered, holding the verdict in hand. "The jury has reached a decision," he said, his voice neutral. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest as he stood and followed the bailiff back into the courtroom. The silence was deafening as the judge read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all charges." The words hit Jacob like a freight train, his chest tightening. The world had shifted, and he wasn't sure if he could recover. Jacob walked out of the courtroom, his reputation in tatters. The weight of the judgment felt like a heavy chain around his neck. Sarah met him outside, her expression unreadable. "We did everything we could," she said quietly. Jacob nodded, his face blank. "I fought for justice," he said, but the words felt hollow. "It doesn't feel like it matters anymore." Sarah touched his arm, her grip steady and supportive. "It matters," she said. "What you did mattered." Jacob didn't respond. The world around him had changed in an instant, and now he had to find a way to rebuild. The case was over, but the struggle was far from finished. He would have to find a new path, one that would allow him to finally let go of the past.